And welcome to a Suffer Publishing Group presentation on the Great Schism. The spiritual battle continues. I'd like to also announce that tonight we're going to have a special guest following the presentation when John Reed Austin is going to join us with a very important message that he wants to share with you tonight. And so once we complete this particular presentation, we will be going into a second half. So stay tuned with us, and then we will be taking questions and answers from there. Okay, the Great Schism, the spiritual battle continues. Presented by Suffer Publishing Group. Publishers of the Sefer Millennium Edition, www.sefer.net. All scriptural citations taken from the Sefer Millennium Edition. The world now sits at the brink of a catastrophic nuclear war as the fires of conflict have been reignited by the powers of the Western Roman Church and the responsive powers of the East. This is not the first time in history that this very same battle has been started. In the time of the Parthian Empire, an understanding was reached between the Parthians and the Romans that the Parthians would not move west of the Euphrates and Rome would not move east of the same. But this agreement was breached by a Roman general who saw easy pickings on the eastern side of the Euphrates and moved ahead with his army to pursue the spoils. But the Parthians destroyed the Romans in that battle and continued to confront Western Rome in devastating battles that would ultimately end the Western Roman Empire. However, as soon as Western Rome could muster military power, the assaults across the Euphrates would be undertaken again, whether by Napoleon, the Kaiser, or the Chancellor. Following the defeat of Napoleon, the communist current was used to work an inside transaction covertly against the Orthodox people of Russia, most successfully succeeding where overt force had failed. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the unexpected has occurred. The atheist world of communism was expected to continue, but instead, the Russians have remembered orthodoxy. Once this became clear to the Western Roman Empire, the demonization of Russia began, and a strategy was employed in Ukraine to once again engage the Orthodox people with a military strategy. They have crossed the Euphrates again in Ukraine. So we begin with a scriptural citation going all the way back to Bereshith, or Genesis chapter 10, verse 25. And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Yoktan. Now, Peleg is a very interesting word. It is the same as Peleg and also the same as Palag. And these words have a particular meaning. Peleg, the name, the noun, means an earthquake. Peleg, the son of Shem. Peleg, the verb, means a rill or a small channel of water that divides the land. And of course, palag, a primitive root, means to split or divide. Palag, to split or divide. Okay. Yoktan, on the other hand, is a word meaning he will be made smaller. And it comes from the root word katan, yo-katan. You see, yo-katan. And this is the primitive root meaning to diminish, i.e. to be small. Some of you might recall that there are certain items of dress in the Hebrew world that are called katans. These are small kind of tallits, if you will. All right, katan, to be smaller. Which is interesting because you would be made smaller if you were in fact divided. Think not that I am come to send peace on the earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. This is from the Gospel of Matthew, not from the book of Bereshit, but from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10. Division is the nature of the faith in Mashiach. Division. The wheat will be divided from the tares. Christianity as a religion began with the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. Now, before this, it was considered a cult, and it was a cult centered around a particular rabbi that had been mercilessly crucified around the year 28 AD in Jerusalem. And of course, a great text for reading the circumstances governing the crucifixion beyond the Gospels is, of course, the Gospel of Nicodemus, also called the Acts of Pontius Pilate. We have published this book at Sefer Publishing Group under the heading of the book Havot, or the Fathers. This gospel appears in that book, the Gospel of Nicodemus, or the Acts of Pontius Pilate. A very good discussion of exactly what went on at the time the crucifixion decision was being made. Anyway, from the time of 28 AD until we get to 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, we basically have an emerging church that has moved from what some people might call a cult status, or an emphasis of a certain kind of Judaism even, into a emerging force of spirituality that is going to be harnessed and leashed and repackaged by the Emperor Constantine. And he called together the bishops that were meeting loosely throughout the world. And by the way, he handpicked the bishops. Some were selected to attend, others were ignored, particularly those of the Jewish bishops that were in the faith were ignored and not included in the councils that would take place under the tutelage of Emperor Constantine. Although many people think Constantine converted to Christianity, he did, but only on his deathbed. And in fact, he fell ill on Easter and converted on his deathbed and died on Shavuot. Very interesting set of circumstances. The life of Constantine is one of intense tragedy. Some of you who have been part of my teaching know that Constantine, at one time, his pride and joy was his son, and his son was a great conquering general that was expanding the empire. And Constantine's wife, the mother of his son, died, and so he remarried, and he remarried a woman that was quite younger than he was. And she came forward being jealous of the relationship between the father and the son, and said that Constantine's son had tried to rape her, tried to have sex with her. And Constantine believed her and then had his son ripped apart by wild animals in the stadium for the offense. He then found out that she'd lied about it, and so he had her ripped apart by animals. But this was an extreme tragedy in the life of Constantine, and it would be his grandson that would initiate aspects of the schism. His grandson would begin to sell off Western Rome and to profit from the sale of Western Rome and putting it in his own pocket. We see this going on in America today, where our politicians have been selling off our interests to foreign powers and putting the money in their own pocket, beginning with Bill Clinton. And so this is how an empire dies, so one way an empire dies. But Constantine, having operated under what's called the key row, which kind of looks like a P with an X through the middle of it, the key row, he believed that this was a symbol of his victory, which he used it as the symbol of the word Christos, meaning good, not Christos, meaning Christ. However, as he merged in towards the end of his life, he recognized that the way to harness the extremely powerful spiritual force of the Messianic community, he needed to somehow put a leash on it, and he put a Roman leash on it, and he did so in the Council of Nicaea. So it was organized by Constantine as emperor of the Roman Empire from the new capital of Constantinople, Constantine's city, Constantinople, Nopolis, a Greek-speaking area of the empire. And remember that this area of the empire was Greek-speaking, not Latin-speaking. All of Turkey at that time spoke Greek, not Latin. All of the Levant spoke Greek, not Latin. Although Latin was spoken in the area, the dominant language was Greek. Therefore, the religion of Christianity was created under canons initially developed at Nicaea. As a consequence, the New Testament was crafted in the Greek language first before being written again in Latin. Now, almost all scholars recognize that the source of the New Testament is Greek, and that the primary source for most of the English speaking or the English translations of Scripture have been taken from mostly the Stephanus Textus Receptus, which is a Greek received text. Other texts that were available included the Beza, which was Greek, and also the Desiderius Erasmus Textus Receptus, which was also Greek. Okay, and the reason it was Greek and not Latin is because the church was formed under Constantine in the Greek-speaking portion of the empire. So there were 7 ecumenical councils developed in the early church, and these canons were accepted by both the Western and Eastern churches. 7 ecumenical councils, which interestingly enough do not include the Council of Laodicea. So the 7 councils broadly accepted by both the Western and Eastern church include: in AD 325, the Council of Nicaea. Its canons included the condemnation of Arius and others. And Arius is the doctrine that Mashiach was conceived and didn't exist before he was born of Mary. And this doctrine was very dominant and, in fact, held great sway in the church until about 500 AD, when it was finally successfully put away. But this was a doctrine that was being promoted by a fellow named Arius, who operated out of the city of Alexandria. And it also, the Council of Nicaea, clarifies the dogma of the divinity of Christos by expanding the creed's 2nd stanza, claiming consubstantiality, among other things. Okay, in AD 381, the First Council of Constantinople, its canons expanded the 3rd stanza of the Nicene Creed, defining the divinity of the Holy Spirit, and also condemned Apollinaris' heresy that Christos lacked a complete human soul. Okay, so you see, and the Council of Laodicea was around 385, not included in this list. In 431, the Council of Ephesus, its canons defined Christos as the incarnate word of Yah and proclaimed Mary Theotokos, that is, the mother of God or God-bearer, after deposing Nestorius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who was not going to allow such provision to be made. Okay, now we see that if you look at Mary Theotokos, meaning the mother of God, could be translated in the Hebrew as Ima Nu El, our mother of El. Ima Nu El. Okay, let's keep going here. In AD 451, the Council of Chalcedon, its canons defined Christos as having both a divine and human nature in one person, Ben Elohim and Ben Adam, divine and human in the same person. AD 553, the Second Council of Constantinople, its canons confirmed Christological and Trinitarian doctrine against the Nestorians. So the argument that was Yahweh Echad had to yield to the idea of Trinitarianism as a result of some of the creation of the church fathers, who decided that God appeared in 3 persons. And this was concretized as part of the Christian church, which both Eastern and Western church agreed to in AD 553. In AD 680, the Third Council of Constantinople affirmed that Christos had a truly human will as well as a truly divine will against the Monothelites, again, a sectarian group that had and held a disparate opinion to that view. In AD 787, the Second Council of Nicaea vindicated the veneration of images, that is to say, icons, based upon the humanity of Christos as the image or icon of the unseen God. So you see that the idea was, as Mashiach said, I tell you the truth, if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. Therefore, icons were permitted. And so, this is called iconoclasm. And, you have to take your own view as to what you think about that. I'm opposed to icons. I mean, there's reasons why you would put up a mural. You would put up a mural so that people might have an understanding of what's going on. For instance, the mural that is on the PowerPoint here behind the text shows two people at odds with one another, the Roman Church versus the Orthodox Church, one church calling itself universal, the other church calling itself correct. But you can see that that is a mural that demonstrates that. And you might have a mural of Mashiach praying in Gethsemane, or you might have a mural of Pilate condemning him to death, or you might have a mural of this, that, or the other thing. That's one thing. When you have a picture that is venerated, an icon of the Madonna and Child, or an icon of a particular saint or particular apostle, and that's being venerated, that image is expressly prohibited by the Ten Commandments. You shall have no graven image. Okay, the Eastern Orthodox Church recognizes only these first 7 ecumenical councils as being truly ecumenical or universal, since they happened before the Eastern and Western Patriarchates were rent by the 1,000-year schism, which has yet to be healed. Whereas the RCC accepts a council as ecumenical only when it is approved and recognized by the Pope to be such, the Eastern Church requires that a council be approved by the 5 patriarchs, namely of Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, to be authentically ecumenical. So the Eastern view created an oligarchic form of governance called the Pentarchy, or a government of the 5 ancient patriarchates. The Roman Catholic Church, however, the RCC, or the Western or Catholic Church, recognizes a total of 21 ecumenical councils, although there is no official binding list. Of these 21, the last 14 of which took place within the jurisdiction of the Western Church. For the Western or Catholic theologians, a council is deemed ecumenical only if it's approved and recognized by the Pope to be such. The papacy then assumes a hierarchical monarchy or even a theological tyranny in its model of governance. Papal infallibility in Roman Catholic ideology, the dogma that the Pope, acting as a supreme teacher and under certain conditions, cannot err when he teaches in the matter of faith or morals, is a doctrine asserted by the Western Church. All right, let's take a look at some images. Okay, so here we see the Roman Empire as the East-West Schism begins circa AD 400. Now here, let's do a little bit of drawing here, since we got some artwork up here we can draw here. So we can see here that this line here is kind of the line of demarcation, showing, okay, well, this is the Eastern Church. Here is Constantinople here, Constantinople right here, which is modern-day Istanbul, by the way, but it was formerly Constantinople. And Istanbul to this day is marked by the presence of the Hagia Sophia, which it was the most important church in Christendom, and now is the Red Mosque that overlooks the city of Istanbul. Okay, so this is the Eastern Empire in green, and the Western Empire here was in brown. And you can see here, for instance, the limitation to the expansion of Rome in the United Kingdom, having reached as far as Hadrian's Wall, not having reached into Ireland as of yet. Of course, there was a Roman wall built here trying to keep the German tribes from coming in, and the German tribes were a transplanted tribe that had actually come out of the Parthian Empire here, transplanted itself through the Caucasus Mountains, moving into this area and confronting Rome again via a different flank. So you had Huns, you had Saxons, you had Jews, even up in Finland. You had the House of Judah in Finland. You had the House of Dan in Denmark. You had Saxons, who were the house of, the Saxons were Isaac's son. That was the house of Joseph, the house of Ephraim. Here throughout Germania, you had the Huns in here. All of these were tribes that were derivative of the 12 tribes of Israel that had been housed in the Parthian Empire. Okay. So this is Western Rome just prior to its collapse. Now you can see here, one important city here is Carthage. Carthage, now in modern day Tunisia, was part of an empire that was feeding all of Western Rome. That is to say, this area here was agricultural area, and it was being used to feed Rome. The Romans didn't appreciate that. They didn't like the Carthaginians' attitude. By the way, most of Carthage was made up of the house of Israel and the 12 tribes of the house of Israel, who were also in apostasy at the time, practicing abortion and child sacrifice, that ultimately resulted in their destruction. And in the Third Punic War, the Russians came in and hammered the Carthaginians and salted the earth and destroyed the city of Carthage. Okay. Well, once that happened, there were some other issues, of course. These Germanic tribes here would continue an onslaught into Rome. And you had, of course, you had two groups here. You had the Ostrogoths over here, the Eastern Goths. And then you had a group that was migrating this way called the Visigoths. The Visigoths. And the Visigoths would ultimately work their way back down here and come back up through Sicily as the Vandals. And the Visigoths would get together and say, hey, what are you doing this summer? I don't know. Let's go down and burn Rome. Okay, great idea. So they'd go down and burn Rome. Well, it's a long story, which I won't get into now, but King Arthur, the first King Arthur in the 4th century AD, tried to come alongside Rome around 390, and he actually won some battles on behalf of the Western Roman Empire. But Western Rome was being sold off by the Byzantine Empire, by Constantinople, the Eastern Empire. And as you can see, that even in 400, in AD 400, there was already a split that had taken place between the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire, partly because of the grandson of Constantine, who was busy looting the Western Empire. Okay. Now, as time progresses, you can see that the Western Empire begins to fall apart entirely. Well, what do we see? Well, the kingdom of the Franks is going to emerge here, the Alemanni here. The kingdom of the Visigoths is going to emerge in Spain. And here are the Vandals down here. And the Western Empire has lost all of France. It's lost most of its control that was dominant throughout this region. They've lost it. They've lost most of Lombardia. They've lost this area up here going into the Balkans. And this area is no longer under their control. But the Byzantium Empire has actually expanded its reach slightly here and is now also controlling into all of Egypt and this portion of northern Africa. So the Byzantine Empire, by the time we get to 527 CE, the Byzantine Empire is thriving while the Western Empire is falling. The Western Empire is coming unglued. And in fact, this so-called prefecture of Italy was actually broken up into city-states. So you had the city-state of Genoa, you had the city-state of Rome, the city-state of Naples, the city-state of Messana or Palermo in Sicily, and so forth. These areas were not what you would call unified under a singular Roman Empire, but rather were unified under a singular Roman religion. However, the religion, again, in the Eastern Orthodoxy is already at odds with the church, because the Eastern Orthodox are saying, well, we have disagreement about doctrine. And this disagreement is going to expand. Now, let's take a look at this. By the time we get to 1020 AD, this is around the time that you see that William the Conqueror has entered into Great Britain, or just prior to that time, William the Conqueror entering into Great Britain. And you can see that the influence of the Western Church is all but gone. The Western Roman Empire has no political jurisdiction anymore at all. And the Byzantine Empire is now holding, even this city of Naples here is part of the Byzantine Empire. Now, when you look at this, you can also see something here that's quite interesting, because what isn't reflected in this map is the fact that this city here, Venice, was controlling this area here. This was all the Venetian Republic, and the Venetian Republic was quite successful in their methodology for handling a republic that would last for 1,000 years. The Venetian Republic was the longest lasting republic in world history. And it lasted for 1,000 years, and it controlled basically all of the Adriatic Sea. And at one time, it even controlled all the way down here into the Peloponnese. So this was actually an area that was controlled by Venice as well. But here we see that the reach of the Byzantine Empire is containing all of Asia Minor, which is now what we call Turkey, and Cyprus, and Crete, and all of Greece. All of this constituted the Byzantine Empire, and even the boot of Italy, all part of the Byzantine Empire, Greek speaking as its political class, okay? And we can see now that, what kind of schism are we talking about? Really, the only thing that's existing as a political force right now is Byzantium. Western Rome is, for all intents and purposes, in shambles. However, what we don't see on this map, and that what we should see, is that in 800 AD, things would change for the better for the Western Empire, because the Western Empire would take advantage of its spiritual leadership and the claim that it was founded on Peter, the rock, and therefore it held the keys to heaven. Then the Roman Empire came out and made this argument, and they had a champion who believed it and who was appointed to the kingdom, the Caesar, the Kaiser, the king of what would emerge as the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. Now, here, we're going to see, when we take a look at this map, we're going to see some interesting things as well. Now, you'll see here that in this map, the Holy Roman Empire is going to reach as far as Florence and almost to Rome. So I think Siena is right here. It was including Siena and Florence and Parma and Genoa and even Milan and Torino. These places and half of Lombardia contained here inside the Holy Roman Empire, plus the Swiss Confederation, the Franche-Comté, and then, of course, you see all of Austria here, and and you see Bohemia and Czechia here, right? And even some elements of Slovakia here, and then, of course, Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium, all being contained within the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire forming in 800 AD, and this is under the tutelage of the illiterate Charlemagne, but they would create this, the Western Rome would create this as a political power to assert the premises of Roman Catholicism into this region. And so the successor to the Western Roman Empire was called the Holy Roman Empire, or in German, the Second Reich. And it prevailed in Western Europe from about AD 800 to AD 1817. What would depose the Holy Roman Empire in AD 1817 was Napoleon, the Corsican. And Napoleon, here we're going to see the successor to the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, following Napoleon's reign. Well, here, let me advance this real quick, and we'll take a look at what Napoleon did. Okay, wait a minute. Let me go back here. Excuse me. We'll get to Napoleon. So the successor to the Holy Roman Empire, the Second Reich, which rose in Western Europe from AD 1935, was called the Third Reich, which suffered a military defeat in 1945 under the Allies, or Protestant forces. Now, here's some areas. This map reflects the idea that the Germans held very similar areas to, you recall that the Holy Roman Empire looked something like this. Right? It contained this, basically. This was the Holy Roman Empire. Now you can see that was the Second Reich, and the Third Reich reached out and controlled a much greater area, including lands that used to belong to Western Rome down here in Northern Africa, and it reached into Russia. Now, when we say Russia, see, this is kind of a generous map, because this map of Russia does not reflect the fact that we have Belarusia here and, of course, Ukraine here. So you have Ukraine here and Belarusia here. And what we see at the far end of this is, right here, the city of Kursk. Over here Stalingrad, and up here, Leningrad. This city is now known as St. Petersburg, which is what it was before the war. And this city is known as Volgograd, which it was before Stalin rechanged it to his name. Kursk has always been Kursk. Okay. So you can see here that this was the far reach of the German Third Reich as of November 8th, 1942. Now, this would all change after November 8th, 1942, as the Russians continued to advance. And ultimately, let me show you this here. You're going to see that the Russians are going to advance against, having won a decisive battle in Kursk, the Russians would begin to advance, and the Russians would ultimately take all of this, including East Prussia, and all the way into East Germany and Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And all of this came under Russian control following World War II. Okay. All right. So, First Reich, Western Rome. Second Reich, Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne. It was when it began. Third Reich, Adolf Hitler. Okay. Now here, we can see the successor to the Third Reich, which suffered a military defeat in 1995 under the Allies, Protestant forces, has reemerged as the commercial and political entity now recognized as the EU, and its military is NATO. So these are the nations of the EU, the European Union. Now, the European Union started out as the European Common Market following the close of World War II. Because remember that when Western Europe was united under Adolf Hitler and the control of the Nazis, the Third Reich, they had a singular control going on for several years. And most of the countries were yielding to the socialism, the National Socialism, that was being proposed by the Third Reich. Austria voted 90-something% of its people voted to join the Third Reich. So Hitler didn't have to invade Austria. It was done by agreement. Italy moved into the Reich via an alliance. France was occupied, but France did very little to stop the occupation of the Germans, who marched through the Maginot Line like it didn't exist. And Spain was a willing participant in the Nazi Party as well. So what you see is here, what the Nazis could not accomplish militarily was accomplished commercially by getting into trade agreements, then following it with a currency and a unified currency, and now an EU leadership whose military expression is NATO. Now, it should be clear to those of you who are following this that NATO is the military expression of the re-emerging Third Reich. And the Third Reich is the thing that was during the 1940s and 1930s, but is no longer because they lost the war, and yet it is. And yet it is. So what we see here, and the angel said unto me, this is from the book Chazon or Revelation, the angel said unto me, wherefore did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, that is the pit of death, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the Sefer of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and 1 is not yet to come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7 and goes into perdition. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings for 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their authority and power and strength unto the beast. Okay, so I have done a video on this called The 10 Kings. I think it was last month. You can go back and check that out when I talk about this particular verse in a little more detail. Okay. The Great Schism, however, is recorded as of AD 1054. This is, roughly, this is going to be 10 years before William the Conqueror crosses from France, from Normandy, into southern Britain with Norman forces to take Britain away from Danish control and put it under Norman control, and the rise of feudalism begins in the UK. Okay, and it is understood as the ongoing division between the Western Roman Catholic Church, the RCC, and Eastern Orthodoxy. A series of ecclesiastical differences and theological disputes between the Greek East and the Latin West preceded the formal split, as the RCC began to exalt both Rome and the Church as universal, and the role of the Pope as the singular patriarch. Doctrinal disputes arose during that time of Augustine concerning the procession of the Holy Spirit, the Filioque, arguing whether the Ruach proceeded from just the Father, which is the Eastern acceptance, or the Father and the Son, which is the Western acceptance. Now, I'm going to speak to that for just 1 second, because you can see that I think the Western view on this is, in fact, the correct view. Why? Because of the Yod, He, Vav, He. Now, let me do this in a little bit broader way. Just a moment. Stop that. Let's do a whiteboard, and you'll be able to see it much better. So in our whiteboard here, we can see that when you're talking about the Yod, He, Vav, He. Now, with these 4 letters, you can see some things that are going on here. Now, one is that the He, which is pronounced Ah, let's put that up here, Ah, and this is pronounced Ah. This is pronounced E, and this is pronounced U. Okay. But this He, okay, is a symbol of the Ruach. And it's pronounced Ah, as in Ah. Ah. It symbolizes breath, which is what Ruach means. Ruach means breath. The Vav, on the other hand, symbolizes the nail. Now, the nail is oftentimes symbolic inside of the Hebrew to represent the Son who died by the nail. Again, the He, pronounced Ah, is a symbol of the Ruach because it symbolizes Ah, expression, a breath, breathing out, an external breath, Ah. And then, of course, the Yod is the hand. And in particular, the Yod is the closed hand, not the open hand. It is the closed hand, symbolizing the Father who created things and closed his hand at the end of 6 days in order to provide the 7th day of rest called the Shabbat. So the closed hand represents the Father. Closed hand represents the Father. The nail represents the Son. The He represents the Ruach, or the breath, which is what Ruach means. So as you can see by looking at this, what do we see? The Ruach proceeds from the Father, and the Ruach proceeds from the Son. You see, the Ruach proceeds from the Son, and the Ruach proceeds from the Father. Okay, so that's my take on it, and that's why I agree with the doctrinal aspect of the Western Church in this respect, that the Ruach proceeds from the Father and the Son. Okay. Now, however, the Eastern approach is basically saying, no, look, the Ruach, when you talk about the Ruach in the creation of existence, it proceeded only from the Father. Well, even that is another question, because Breshith opens up with the phrase, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so something to consider. All right. Now, how about whether leavened bread, which is Eastern acceptance, or unleavened bread, Western acceptance, should be used in the Eucharist? The Eastern Church believes that it's fine to use leavened bread, but the Western Church does not. The Western Church arguing that the leavened bread is consistent with the bread taken at Passover, even though they have the Eucharist 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Technically, the bread of the Passover is mandatory for the believer, cannot be withheld by a priest. It is mandatory, and it is to be taken at the time of Pesach as unleavened bread. Okay. Now, the Pope's claim to universal jurisdiction, which is Western tyranny, and the place of the see in Constantinople in relation to the Pentarchy, which is Eastern oligarchy. So the expectation of the church in the East was that it would be managed by an oligarchy. The expectation of the church in the West is that it would be managed by a tyranny under the Pope. Okay, very important distinction. And the Pope was claiming ultimate authority over the church, period, that all five of the members of the Pentarchy, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Constantinople, and Rome, were all equal, but one, Rome, was more equal than the others. And this was anathema to the church leaders in Byzantium. Okay. And as a result, it caused a permanent split. As of AD 1054, a permanent split took place between Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Catholicism. And I'll tell you how bad it was in the year 2002, 2003, Pope John Paul II went into the nation of Georgia, an Orthodox country, and the Georgian patriarch said, "Get out of here. I don't want to talk to you." And Pope John Paul said, "Well, can't we just say the Our Father together?" And he said, "No, I'm not talking to you. Get out. Get out of the country. You know, you're the Western Church is anathema to the Eastern Church." And even though there was an attempt by the Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church recently to try to move in the direction of the Roman Church, it was since rebuked. Why was it rebuked? Because, of course, now we have an out-and-out war going on between West and East. All right. Now let's take a look, and let's look at some of the jurisdictions here when we're talking about Orthodox areas practicing Eastern Orthodoxy, as compared to areas practicing or calling themselves Roman Catholic. Now, having recently been in Western Europe, I can tell you that most of Western Europe, and this was a conversation we were having with a friend, and they were pointing out to us, look, most Europeans are Catholic in name only, and they're not even that anymore. It used to be that you had people that would call themselves Catholic, and their children would be baptized with a sprinkling baptism, and then maybe they'd show up at church for Christmas and Easter. Quite often it was Christmas and Easter, and they'd have crosses around their neck and maybe have a crucifix in their house, and that was the extent of their Catholicism. And so these were kind of Catholics in name only. However, that has even faded. Now they don't even bother to do that. Most people are phone app is their religion, phone app. They have no other religion other than their cell phone. And so as a consequence, they don't know anything about the faith. They don't know anything about the faith journey, and they don't hold themselves out as Catholic, even though these nations that we see here on the map, including Ireland, Spain, Portugal, France, Austria, and so on, in some of these nations, they are intolerant to other faiths. For instance, Ireland is pretty much intolerant. France is definitely intolerant. Spain has demonstrated intolerance. Austria has demonstrated intolerance. Some of the other countries are a little bit more diversified, but most of these countries are single faith nations, and they claim and cling to Catholicism. Okay. However, most of the Catholic approach in Western Europe is Sinos, Catholic in name only. Now, you also see in this map the purple nations. So here you see, and let's go through this just a little bit here. Here you can see Iceland here, Protestant, right? Norway, Sweden, Finland. Now, most of these are Lutheran. Estonia has Lutheran churches in it. Latvia has Lutheran churches in it. And you're going to see, of course, Denmark and most of Germany, many pockets of Germany are Lutheran, as is the Netherlands Lutheran. Here in Britain, however, we have something entirely different. We have Anglicanism, the church formed by Henry VIII, a distinct form of Protestantism, different than the Protestantism we see in the Germanic and Nordic countries. Okay, it's a different kind of Protestantism. And of course, some of the volatile Protestants who used to live in Belfast, here you go, right here in Northern Ireland, also a group of Protestants. And Anglicans is their nature of Protestantism. You don't see Anglicans here is somewhere in Switzerland. And you don't see Anglicans over here in Latvia and Estonia or in Finland. You don't see Anglicans there. You see Lutherans there, okay? And you can see the Christian church as compared to the Orthodox church. Now, when we see this now, we talk about the Orthodoxy. So you have a very dominant Orthodoxy. Hold on just a second. We have a very dominant Orthodoxy here in Greece. This is a dominant Orthodoxy. Well, why is it dominant? Well, the reason it's dominant is because, well, for one, this is where it was formed. Remember that the Greek formation is what caused this to take place to begin with, right? It was the Greek formation in Constantinople that caused the church to exist here. So Greece, here, this nation is Orthodox. And so when you go into Greece, you'll find Orthodox churches all over the country, and they're really quite beautiful. You walk inside, a very hot day in Athens, and you walk inside and they're all dark blue, right? So it's kind of beautiful, actually, when you see it. And so the Greek Orthodox churches, and then you see that the Greek Orthodox Church is going to expand out here to include aspects of Macedonia. This is the Greek Orthodox Church. Now, here in Bulgaria, it's the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. It's the Romanian Orthodox Church in Romania. It is the Moldovan Orthodox Church in Moldova, and Ukraine has its own Orthodox Church, even though it is in a contest with Russian Orthodoxy, which also claims turf in Ukraine. Belarus, Russian Orthodox. Russia, well, what would you expect? Russian Orthodox. When you get over here, however, you see that there is Georgia, which has its own Orthodoxy, the Georgian Orthodox Church, and it is distinct from the Armenian Orthodox Church. Now, in all of this turf, we can also see some other interesting anomalies, which is that you see Islam here in green, and you can see that there are Islamic countries. Where? Well, right here, look at this. See, this is Islamic turf in Albania and also parts of Bosnia-Herzegovina and parts of Serbia, including the area they call Kosovo. Those are Islamic areas, and it was very difficult. At one time, this was all Islamic, but the Austrians fought back in the 1500s and were able to push the Ottomans back out of most of the Balkans, even though some remain in these areas. So in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for instance, which is Sarajevo is the capital, Sarajevo has a dominant Islamic center, although there are Jewish synagogues and Christian churches, Orthodox churches in Bosnia, okay? So it's a very interesting combination. And you can also see that we see strong Islamic influence here in the Northern Caucasus, including this area here. Now, this area here, Dagestan and Chechnya, all Islamic. The little red area you see there is actually North Ossetia, or it's called Alana. That's Russian Orthodox. It's mostly Russian speaking. But then you have Ingushetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, Cherkessia, and even into Krasnodar. This area here, Islamic at the top of the northern part of the Caucasus. Big pocket of Islam in here. inside central Russia. And then, of course, when you get into Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and so on and so forth, Islamic. Now, what this map does not reflect, it does not reflect the current presence and substantial presence, I might add, of Islam in France, Islam in the United Kingdom, Islam in Scotland, right? Islam in Germany and the Czech Republic, Islam in Italy, and even Islam in Spain. So it doesn't reflect those things. But anyway, we can look at this map and we can see, generally speaking, what the distribution is between Eastern Orthodoxy and the Western Church. So when we see this exploitation, now, so what took place is you had Russia saying, and this is an important point of this whole discussion here, you had Russia saying, look, this nation here used to be the USSR, this nation used to be part of the USSR, this used to be part of the USSR, okay? This was all USSR. Romania was part of the USSR. Bulgaria was part of the USSR. This was all, everything behind this white line was USSR. Now, that's not the end of the discussion, however, because you have to remember also that this area here, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, used to be called Czechoslovakia, Hungary, these were all called Warsaw Pact nations that the Russians occupied after World War II as a buffer between Russia and Western Europe. Down here, these countries here, this country here, unified all the way down to here, was called Yugoslavia. It was a single communist state. And the green state here was Albania. And Albania was an interesting communist state aligned with Red China, of all things. So this was essentially the layout. Now, the Russians came in and said, look, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the very first thing they lost was the Warsaw Pact. But all of these countries became independent. And so the agreement was made in 1992 that NATO would not expand into a former SSR country. But NATO has expanded into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, former SSR republics. There is a strong American presence in the nation of Georgia. And there has been a heavy push in Ukraine since 2014. And so the Russians said, no, you can't do it in Ukraine. So this was, right here, the Euphrates River, okay? Don't cross the Euphrates. This is Orthodox. Stay over here. We won't come over here. You don't come over there. The same agreement that was made during the Parthian Empire. Don't come over here. We won't come over there. Well, instead, in 2014, under the tutelage of one Barack Obama, we went in and orchestrated a military coup in Ukraine, overthrowing the democratically elected republic to create the modern regime we have now. And this modern regime began actively seeking membership in both the EU and in NATO, even though they're not a Western Roman-dominated country. Okay, so that's what's kind of weird about this whole thing. And so the Russians have said, no, you can't do that. Well, again, we're back to the same thing that happened that caused the schism to begin with, and it is the same players over and over again. Now, when we talk about this schism, let's continue on. I want to show you some things here. Take a look at this, okay? So here's some churches in Moscow. Now, this church that I'm showing you right here, this is a church called Hram Christa Spasitelya, which means the Church of Christ our Savior. This church was a pre-existing church, looked kind of like this, that was torn down by Joseph Stalin, and he tore it down because he wanted to put up the Palace of the Soviets here, which would have been a 100-story building with a 70-story statue of Vladimir Lenin on top of it. That was his plan. However, after they tore the church down, they found out that it was too near the Moscow River, it was swamp, and could not support a building that size. So he put in a giant municipal swimming pool. Well, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Yuri Lushkov, the mayor of Moscow, immediately tore out the swimming pool and rebuilt this church. This church is the most important church, arguably, in Russia. Chram Christa Spasitelia, the Church of Christ our Savior. Okay? Now, another church that you guys might recognize is this one here, Sobor Vasilia Blazhenovo. This is Saint Basil Sobor, or St. Basil's Cathedral. And this church has all these interesting onion domes here, and it sits in Red Square, or what they call Krasnaya Ploshad. It sits in Red Square, and it evidences the beauty, really, of the faith in orthodoxy as expressed by this architect, who built it for Ivan the Terrible, by the way. And when Ivan the Terrible, he called him in and he said, "Hey, I want to ask you a question. Can you build this church again?" He said, "Of course I can." He said, "Fine." And he had his eyes poked out. Okay, that was Ivan the Terrible for you. But this church continues to be, in my opinion, a most beautiful artifact in the world, a very beautiful creation. I'm not a big fan of church buildings, but this one's beautiful. Now, look at this. I want to show you this. These churches here are all inside the Kremlin, okay? Down here, you see this little red tower down here. This tower down here, that's part of the wall of the Kremlin. These churches here are inside the Kremlin, which kind of surprised me. It's like, really? I thought you guys were atheist communists. Why didn't you tear all this stuff down? Because they didn't. So you see here, this tall tower over here on this side. This is the bell tower of Ivan the Terrible. This church right here is the Church of St. Michael. And this church over here is the Church of the Annunciation. This is where the czars had all their babies baptized. Here's the church inside the walls. And this church over here on the far left is the Church of the Assumption. This church here, this is the Church of the Assumption. And this church is the church where all of the patriarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church are buried in this church. Okay? These are all inside the Kremlin. Well, that's kind of a shock. All right, now take a look at this. I want to show you this. At the close of the Holy Roman Empire, Eastern Orthodoxy was united with Russia, providing the largest number of churches in the world. Now, here we're going to see this map that I'm showing you here is Europe in 1812 under the conquest of Napoleon. Napoleon would sweep all the way down through Italy. He would sweep through the Empire of Austria, the Austrian Empire. He would push against the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire, and ultimately he would push into Moscow. And when he got to Moscow, the Russians said, "Well, you want to come into Moscow? Great, fine. Bring in your troops." He entered with 2 million troops. The Russians burned Moscow to the ground and disappeared. And then he had to try to figure out a way to keep his troops alive during the Russian winter, which was almost impossible. After 2 years, only 20,000 troops returned to France. Okay, so this was the extent and the reach of Napoleon. Okay, now what did Napoleon think about religion? Well, here's some of the things he said. Religious wars are basically people killing each other over who has the better imaginary friend, Napoleon Bonaparte, right? "I am surrounded by priests who repeat incessantly that their kingdom is not of this world, and yet they lay their hands on everything they can get." And he went on to say what? "There must be religion, otherwise the poor would murder the rich," right? He was admitting that religion is used to enslave the poor as a control mechanism. In an attempt to win over Egypt, Napoleon considered converting himself and his army to Islam. However, the French troops wouldn't go for it because it cut them off from French wine and brie. Okay, significant problem. Okay, Europe in 1812, okay. So following the defeat of Napoleon in 1812 in Russia, the Jesuit order began to move within Orthodox circles. In 1820, Alexander I expelled the Society of Jesus from Russia, partly due to fears that the Jesuits were converting Russian Orthodox to Catholicism. In 1843, Prince Ivan Gagarin, a great-grandfather of Yuri Gagarin, the first person in space, converted to Catholicism and became the first Russian Jesuit. He was followed by a string of others. Gagarin was well known in Russian society. He even wrote a pamphlet entitled La Russie c'est-elle catholique, in which he argued that the Russians should become Catholic. He and his Jesuit colleague, Ivan Martynov, took part in several polemics. The Jesuits then came under attack for supposedly attempting to convert Russians to Catholicism. The anti-Jesuit feeling reached a pitch when Ivan Gagarin was accused of being implicated in a conspiracy leading to Pushkin's duel, which resulted in Pushkin being shot. and buried. And then they went back to look at his skull because they admired the poet. And when they dug him up, they found out they had buried him alive, which, by the way, is what Rachmaninoff's C-sharp minor prelude is all about. Okay. By the end of the Tsarist period, the Orthodox Church was witnessing renewal movements where the need for stronger preaching and pastoral energy was expressed, yet the tide had turned against Catholicism. Tolstoy and Dostoevsky would come to criticize Catholicism in their novels. Consider the extract from The Idiot, where Dostoevsky's novel depicts the Jesuits as the epitome of all that can be disliked in Catholicism. Triggered by the story of conversion related within this fictional text, Prince Mishkin, the protagonist, continues by saying that Catholicism is not even Christian. In reviewing the literature from these Russian writers in the 19th century, it can be seen that they repeatedly chose to define who the Jesuits were in their work, and all of them attribute similar traits to them. They are seen as agents in political plots. So that's a critical thing here. Agents in political plots who are involved in Machiavellian scheming. They treat moral actions as a means to an end, use casuistry and the art of eloquence, persuasion, and importantly, proselytizing to meet their ends. And these attributes are also present in the polemical texts and essays. As demonstrated by these authors, these traits in different circumstances might be positive, but are nearly always contextualized so that the Jesuit can only be understood negatively. Secondly, if these extracts from Pushkin, Tolstoy, and Dostoevsky are anything to go by, then the Jesuit was connected to the trope of the woman who is linked in turn with the serpent and Satan. Well, the question then arises as to the involvement of the Jesuits in creating an environment of hostility toward the Tsar and the rise of nihilism in Russia, which ultimately would result in the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. Of course, Alexander II had a son at a very early age who was sequestered away to the United States, and his second son, Nicholas II, would take the throne of Russia, only to be executed together with his family by the Bolsheviks in their overthrow of Tsarist Russia. By the end of the reign of Joseph Jugashvili, Stalin, the Bolshevik communist movement had taken the lives of some 66 million Russian believers and imposed a mandatory atheism on the nation. Yet the Bolsheviks were financed by the West, namely Jacob Schiff and Andrew Carnegie, bankers in New York. The West did not seek to go to a hot war with Russia during the tenure of the worker state in communist, but was content to employ the Soviet Union as an ally in order to defeat the Third Reich in Europe and the Japanese Empire in the Pacific. However, following the Allied victory over the Reich, a new Cold War was put into place, stalemating the world behind the threat of mutually assured destruction called the MAD Doctrine, where the world sat poised at the brink of nuclear war for 4 decades. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, however, Russia lurched back into its tradition of Eastern Orthodoxy, and once it became clear to the West that this had happened, the need to go to war with Russia once again raised its head, and it is indeed a spiritual war. Okay, so with that, we have a group here gathering here. Let's see, I want to welcome John Reed Austin. John, how are you there, brother?
Doing good. Can you hear me okay?
Well, I could hear you a little bit better if you were a little bit louder, but that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess Mike Carper is with us too.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, Mike, I guess I wasn't where you were going to join us, but I guess you're here now. So there you go.
I heard it from John. So.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, well, I want to take a moment just for a second here to address our audience for just a second, if you guys don't mind, before we get into this presentation. So I want to say this to you guys. So we've got this. We have been talking about this for this last hour. And in this discussion, I want to present to you guys that if you have any questions concerning this, save your questions until we get through John's presentation. John's got a loaded presentation for us tonight, and we had some technical difficulties, but I think all these technical difficulties were part of Yah's plan to make sure that this was a carefully disguised disclosure, because sometimes you can say these things and sometimes you can't. And we're going to hear some pretty explosive things tonight in terms of, you guys might recall John Reed Austin has appeared as one of the teachers at Sefer Academy, teaching specifically on the Mazarot. For those of you who are not aware of the Mazarot, this is a discussion of the stars and its scriptural place. And the Mazzaroth are discussed most particularly out of the book of Job. And we have seen that, in fact, there's a great deal of discussion about the stars in the heavens and what they mean. And it's a very big part of Scripture. And because of that, one of the leaders in the biblical world in the last couple of hundred years was E.W. Bullinger, whose companion Bible is one of the best Bibles to emerge out of the 19th century. And E.W. Bullinger also wrote A Witness to the Stars and discussing the Mazzaroth. And so John has given a wonderful presentation on Sefer Academy. For those of you who are not up to speed on the Mazzaroth and their biblical implications, you can go and buy the course from Sefer Academy right now and go through the videos at your leisure, okay? And so that's good. And so, John, I want to welcome you for being here. And I also want to welcome Mike being here. And again, I just want to throw this guys out to you. Any comments that you have on the presentation just made or questions that you have concerning that presentation, save them up until we finish John's presentation, and then we'll go through all of this together, okay? All right. So that's being said. Okay, so John, give us an introduction here. Tell us a little bit.
Okay. Well, to be honest with you, I'm a little nervous only because we were just talking via text a couple of days ago. Hey, you want to talk about this? So if I sound a little discombobulated, it's just because I'm trying to figure out where I want to start and where I want to end. So what I've been watching is some things unfolding, and you should have some PowerPoints there.
I do.
Okay. I'd like to look at the first one. I guess that's the best way to start. I've been doing a lot of journaling, more than I have seen in the last 3 or 4 years that I've been journaling. I've got this thing here. It's my Star Journal, 11.5 by 8, and waterproof cover. It's called It's Written in the Stars, Book 4. And I started Book 4 in May on the coronation of King Charles. And so I'm already almost at the halfway point of 200 pages. So that's there's a lot of things going on here. It's just overwhelming. And just in the last couple of days, or even the last week, since the supermoon, which was August 2nd, we've been seeing a lot of things unfolding here. So I'm going to go back, if we can look at the first PowerPoint there. On February 6th, we had an earthquake. Is that the one? Okay. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to improvise here. Since this is the first one, I've been putting these PowerPoints together. So, but there was an earthquake in Turkey. So Turkey is really, we need to be watching what's going on in Turkey. In the last few years since COVID-19 started in 2020, Turkey has been in the news a lot. They started with, in July, there was the transfer of, we'll call it ownership for lack of better terms. They converted the Hagia Sophia, which was one of the largest churches in the world at one time, 1,500 years ago. And they converted it into a mosque. And it was during the time that the Jewish people remembered the days of mourning, the 3 days of mourning, or 3 weeks of mourning. And so when they remember the 9th of Av, and they remember the temples that were destroyed. It was also the day that the Jewish, not the Jewish people, but the children of Israel, they murmured about going into the land and that there was giants. And so it was on that day that God banished them for 40 years in the wilderness. So it was during that time. And so since then, Turkey has been in the news. And as you probably remember, it was on Tu B'Shvat, which is the year of trees, February 6th, it fell on this year. There was a major earthquake on that day, and it was in Turkey, and over 50,000 people now. I don't know if they've stopped counting, but 50,000 people just in Turkey alone. We're not even talking Syria here. They perished. And so it's the largest ever. But most people don't know that there's actually been 3 earthquakes in Turkey, and the first 2 of them all happened the same year that there was a world war. So we're going to look at this first PowerPoint and we'll bring it all together. So you see that in 1889, Hitler was born. And so we're now looking at the 134th year of his birthday. Nothing to celebrate about, of course. And then there was an eclipse in 1933, and it was in the area of Pisces, where there was Uranus. It makes an 84 circle around the Mazzaroth every 84 years. That's a multiple of 12 times 7. So you have order and you have Shemitah combined in that. Shemitah is every 7 years. For those of you who are not familiar with Shemitah, every 7 years they rest the land, they forgive debts, they release slaves. All right, so it was a Shemitah year that this happened. So then 6 years later, we see here Turkey and Germany. You see the big bold there. So Hitler's eclipse. And then 6 years later, we have 11/7/1938. Now, I want you to remember that date. This is really interesting. 11/7/1938. There was a lunar eclipse with Uranus. So in other words, there was a flyby. The eclipse actually eclipsed Uranus. So if you see there, you see the blood moon. It was a blood moon, and you see Uranus there. And then there was a hybrid solar eclipse. Okay, so what is a hybrid solar eclipse? It's a very rare eclipse, doesn't happen very often, but we had one this year. And there was a hybrid eclipse that took place the same year as World War II. And the hybrid eclipse is a combination of a total and a annular. So in layman's terms, if you want to watch an eclipse, make sure it's a total eclipse. But if you have that ring of fire, there's too much infrared that can destroy your eyes, so you can't look at it. So an annular eclipse, don't look at it. In fact, we're going to have one in October 14th this year, 1 week exactly after the Feast of Tabernacles ends. And I'm going to be in Kerrville, Texas, to do a concert there with a reverend by the name of Lueda Reschke. And so I've been invited to come down there. So if anybody in Texas, come down, and I'll be doing a concert in the afternoon after the eclipse. So you have the World War II eclipse, which is a hybrid solar eclipse. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is patterns that are being repeated. Let me see if I can move my screen here a little bit. Okay, so then you have, see if I can blow this up. Actually, you know what, I'm going to look at my thing here I can see it better on my end. You notice right there that there is Jupiter and Venus conjunction.
Right.
And right after that was March the 1st. And then on September 2nd was the beginning of World War II. So we're coming up very close to that anniversary. And just a month from that anniversary, well, actually, it was 9/1. So that's the one that I'm predicting, that there would be a World War III starting and actually it would be it'd be the second. So I'm going to explain why. And so let's go ahead and look at the next PowerPoint. And you'll see that was the hybrid eclipse, World War III. So is this the next? Okay, so you see the next one here. It doesn't have Hitler, but it has the 63rd birthday of Erdogan. He's the president of Turkey, which I would rather call him a dictator. He thinks he can change everything around. So especially when he changes the mosque or the church into a mosque. So, and that's where a lot of Christianity came out of. You had, Constantinople, and you had John wrote the Revelation, and so a lot of things off the island of Patmos. So Turkey was sort of a hotbed for a long time. It was a Christian nation. Now it's all Muslim. So
we
here
talked
we
about
have,
that before. We talked about that, John, just before you came on. In fact, I mentioned the Hagia Sophia, that Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Orthodoxy, began in Constantinople, and
right,
the 7 ecumenical councils that are recognized by the Eastern Church were primarily out of the Constantinople area. The fact that the Byzantine Empire was Greek speaking is the reason why the New Testament appears in Greek. The Hagia Sophia was the most important church in Christendom until 1453, when it fell to the Ottoman control. But the Ottomans had, the Ottomans had it as, they intended it as a mosque, and they put up minarets around it, but they maintained it as a museum for all these years until Erdogan decided to convert it back into a mosque.
exactly. Yeah, and there were some very key prophetic things that happened in the heavens on the day that he did that. I don't have, but for sake of time, we can get into that later if we have time, but I want to get through these PowerPoints. So here we have the annular solar eclipse. And this was in, this, we call this the Erdogan eclipse. And that was, you have, it says 2/26/2017. And again, you have Uranus that's coming into the picture again in its complete circle of 84 years. And then 6 years later, you have the hybrid solar eclipse again. So, and actually there's the Uranus lunar conjunction again, down in the bottom there. You see, it says 11/8/2022. Now, if you flip back to the other PowerPoint, the previous one, you notice it was on 11/7/1939 or 38 actually. And so here we have just a day apart. There you go. See, 11/7/1938. And then there was a hybrid solar eclipse again. So it's repeating. History is repeating itself in the heavens. And so what we have is we have earthquake, blood moon, solar eclipse, hybrid that is, followed by world war.
Yeah, interesting here too, John. Look at this too. Going back to slide 1 here, we see a distance between the first annular solar eclipse, 1933, and then this is going to go up to 1938 or 5 years later. And here we see here 2017, and now 5 years later in 2022.
Yeah,
an annular eclipse followed by a hybrid solar eclipse.
Yeah, or 6 years later. But yeah, and then look at it, you got the conjunction again with with Venus and Jupiter on March the 1st. So when you see these sort of things, it gives you goosebumps to realize we could see history repeating itself just a day apart. Each event was a day apart. And so is there a great possibility we could see World War III beginning on the 2nd, not the 1st, but the 2nd this year? And so I've been watching really carefully events that are unfolding, and I've been journaling them, and these supermoons that happened this month. There was an event that happened. Let me look at my thing here because I want to make sure I say it right. It was 2 days prior to Tisha B'Av. The judicial reform bill passed, and the Israeli police clashed with crowds of protesters moments after the parliament passed the bill. And the 9th of Av historically has been bad times for Israel, as I just explained. So, now what we also noticed, I don't know if you were able to get some screenshots of the stars
I did not get those, John. I'm sorry.
Okay, so if anybody has Skyview or anything like that, you can look in there and you'll notice that right now Saturn is in the lap of Delhi, which is the Hebrew for waterman or Aquarius. And so in that waist area or lap area there, Saturn represents, it can have a dual frequency. It can be evil, like a death, or it could be a beginning, like a life. So life, death, or beginning, or an end of something. And, 7 is the number of completion. So it could be, and we're in a Shemitah year. So, and a Jubilee year. So we have some very key things going on here, and a lot of things happening on Earth that seem to point that we're about ready to see something unfold really amazing worldwide. Movies coming out. There's no question that God has his hands on things that are bringing us to our attention about children and about World War II. You got Oppenheimer. You had the Jesus Revolution movie. You had there was a couple other movies that just came out. Oh yes, the Harrison Ford movie. If you haven't seen the movie, there's a part there where it goes back into time during World War II, and so it's trying to keep from history being changed. So all of our attention's being
Now,
focused.
interestingly enough, John, now that you mentioned that movie, you're talking about Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
The new Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
I remember watching that. We went with our grandsons to see it. And, him being Harrison Ford being back, and they were shooting new sequences. That was new stuff. It wasn't stuff that was on the clipping floor, right?
Right.
It wasn't stuff on the clipping floor. And which tells me that, having listened to Mike Around the World here recently, that I believe that whole sequence, that opening sequence of them going back in time to Germany, was in fact done using AI. That all of that imagery, that was not a real actor. That was an image of Harrison Ford.
Yeah, it was a
AI
CGI
image.
actually. Yeah, they de-aged him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating that we would see this. And of course, now when you talk about the precipice, these things leading to us, we have the announcement of digital currency in the United States that came down last night, this thing called WorldCoin, and 31 banks are already applying for it, right? And
Right.
it is tied to a social digital credit score, and which requires a retinal scan in order to function, and so on and so forth. So the enslavement of mankind in the beast system is now right here in front of us. It's right here. It's right here in our face, right?
Yep.
And so here we are, late in the game in August, right? Now the 10th of August. So, we're looking at roughly, you're talking about 23 days or 3 weeks and 3 weeks and change.
And there's going to be another super moon at the end of the month too.
At the end of this month.
Yes, it's going to be a blue moon.
Yeah, and that super moon, of course, is going to be marking the 15th day of the month of Elul.
Yes.
Or the 6th month. And again, these are the days of what are they called? The days of woe. These are the times when
days of awe. Yeah.
Yeah, when we are supposed to be contemplating the coming of Yom Kippur,
right?
A 40-day period, and it's clear the 40-day period is clearly marked in Luke chapter 4, when Mashiach goes into the desert for 40 days. He goes into the desert for 40 days, and he fasts in the desert, where he is tempted by Satan 3 times, and at the end of that temptation, he comes back into the country, and he goes to the synagogue, as was his custom, and he opens up Isaiah 61 to say, the Ruach Adonai Yahweh is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, and to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh, to proclaim the Jubilee year, which can only be done on Yom Kippur.
And as a matter of fact, I can actually prove, and I think I did this for the class on Sefer Academy, that I can prove where the heavens were at. And it was actually on Yom Kippur when he did that. I can prove it in the heavens.
You can prove it, that it was Yom Kippur. So now we've got a second witness to the idea that he fasted in the desert for 40 days throughout the whole month of Elul, and the first 9 days of the month of Tishri, or the month of Etanim, until we get to Yom Kippur. And then at Yom Kippur, he proclaims the year of Jubilee. So it's an incredibly important passage in the Gospel of Luke giving us a demonstration about what it means. Look, it's not Lent. You know what I mean, John? It's not Lent.
Exactly.
This is the 40 days leading into Yom Kippur. And now we're in this, and we're going to have a marker here on the 15th day of the month of Elul, which is the full moon, which you're telling us is a super moon.
Yes, not only is it super moon, it's a blue moon, which is not a really big deal prophetically. But what a blue moon is you got two full moons in the same calendar month, and we have a Gregorian calendar system. So big deal, right? But they're both super moons preceding a new moon that brings us into the month of Tishri. So it's God trying to get our attention about some things. And there's a lot of super things that are happening right now that if we get caught up with the propaganda of, fake news networks, and we don't do a little digging on our own. I was just playing at a facility today, and I was telling everybody about what's going on. And there was one guy who was kind of a researcher. He says, "I bet you I know it all." And I says, "Well, I bet you don't, because you're listening to Fox News, and that's all. But I guarantee you're not getting it on Fox."
You've been Foxed.
So I started telling him about all the things that are going on right now, and he was just jaw dropped about everything I was telling him. And he says, "Wow, I'm going to have to do more research." But
Exactly.
yeah, so the heavens are telling us God, did this billions of years ago. He lined everything up perfectly. Every object that even floats in the universe has a specific calling, an instruction, and they abide by that instruction. But those that did not keep their proper domain are reserved in chains of darkness. So, but what we're seeing here is that you have Saturn. It can be an evil planet, or it could be a good. It's the seventh heavenly body. So you count the sun and the moon and the 5 planets that were known at the time that the scriptures were being written. So, but Uranus does play a part in all of this because of its circle around the Mazarot. So Saturn is it's been in the news a lot. I mean, they've got over 120, 150 moons now that they've counted. It's the most mooned planet in our solar system now. It beat out Jupiter. So, but anyway, let me also point out. So we got Saturn or Sapte. Is where it gets the Hebrew word is Shabte, which means Sabbath. So it's a Sabbath planet. So this could represent people who are keeping the appointed times. And so if we're keeping the appointed times, we're going to know what God is up to. He's not going to hide it from those who walk uprightly. He's going to reveal secrets to us. And so I believe God has been showing me these things since 2017. When I saw that there was going to be tetrads, and then we had the Revelation 12 sign that followed the eclipse, and then we had these triads, 3 blood moons, and they all fell on feast days, not feast days, but holidays. Tu B'Shvat, as a matter of fact. 2 of them fell on Tu B'Shvat, and the middle one fell right before the 9th of Av, and that was when they passed the basic law bill in Israel. The Knesset passed that law bill.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Now, while we're talking about this, John, let's just clarify for people that are new to this what the 9th of Av is all about. You mentioned before that the 9th of Av was historically the day that the house of Israel in the wilderness during the Exodus murmured against Moshe concerning going into the land and facing the giants. And Yah made the decision, okay, you're not going in right now. In fact, your generation is going to die in the desert, and only your children are going to go in. And
Yes.
the only 2 exceptions were Joshua and Caleb. But the 9th of Av also was the day that Solomon's temple was burned to the ground by the forces of Nebuchadnezzar. It was also the day that the second temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, and also marked the day of the signature of the decree on the Alhambra decree in Spain, kicking all of the Jews out of Spain on the 9th of Av in 1492. Interestingly enough, on the 10th of Av in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue with his 3 ships full of Spanish Jews, right? So I just wanted to clarify the 9th of Av a little bit so people knew what you were talking about.
Yeah. Yes. So now let's move to another. If everybody's got Skyview, you can enter the date, which is August 2nd. So we see that I'm reading here in my notes. So Venus, Mercury, and Mars are all exiting the sign of the crab, which is actually a false sign. It's a corrupted sign. It originally was called Sartan, which it has to do with a scarab beetle. So scarab beetle looks very similar to a crab.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so Mercury is a messenger planet. So it's carrying a message for both Venus, representing Benjamin Netanyahu. So remember, there was a thing that was passed in Israel. It was for the judicial overhaul. And he's standing his ground about the vote to, at the time that this was written down, to judicial reform in spite of the massive protests. And then Mars, he represents Biden. So right now, that's who it represents. So Netanyahu would be Venus and Biden would be Mars. Now, it's a long story about how God showed me to put names on these planets. It's kind of like, you have a football team. And we'll use John Elway as an example. John Elway was number 7 for the Denver Broncos. But then, he had to take that number from somebody else that preceded him. And that was, I can't even remember his name. He took us to the first Super Bowl. And so they had to retire his number. So God will assign, just like he did when he gave the dream to Joseph. And he told his family, he says, I saw the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to me. And they got it. They understood, oh, you're talking about us. And so God had assigned him at that time for that generation. So from time to time, a planet will represent a leader that has world influence. And then at a time it'll drop that. So, for example, Jupiter was represented Donald Trump, and I've had some people go, "No, come on," there's a lot of people that really hate Donald Trump, and when I tell them that that's Donald Trump, they go, "What are you talking about?" So, but the thing is that there were so many events that involved him. And there were key events with Jupiter at that time. But right at the time that they were doing the electoral vote count, there was a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. And remember, I said Saturn represents the end or the beginning?
Right, yeah.
Well, we could see Donald Trump be a president again. I don't know. I'm not a prophet for that sort of thing. I'm going to get a swig of water. But Saturn represents an end. And so he was being knocked out, and that was God's doing because he finished his course. He finished what God had called him to do, and that was to represent Israel and restore them to prominence.
Now, John, when you mentioned Mercury coming out of the crab as a messenger, so
yes.
This messenger is bringing bad news to both Venus and to Mars. Is that correct?
Okay, so basically, the Biden administration is choosing to rethink its policy on its relationship to Israel now. Before they were, badgering Netanyahu, saying, "Hey, you need to back down," but he stood his ground. So for the Biden administration, it would be bad news. But for those who are fearers of Yahovah, they would see this as good news. So at one time, they're against Netanyahu. Now they're thinking, well, maybe we need to think about how we're going to support Israel. And so for now, they've decided that the relationship to Israel is unshakable. And that's been a kind of a catchphrase for a long time. So now, so that message was a message of kind of a rebuke and admonishment at the same time. So there's dual frequencies here. So everything has a positive or a negative. So whenever we're looking at these planets, if you're taking notes, you'll just say, okay, well, I'm going to watch what happens with Mercury and Venus and Mars. So Mercury is always going to represent some kind of a message. Now, before it was a messenger, but it also represented Benny Gantz when he was running against Netanyahu. But now he's out of the picture, so he's been retired. So now God has that reserved for another leader, perhaps. So you see how I'm putting this together is that each planet will represent somebody or some event until that has passed, and then God will reassign that planet for something else or somebody else. So for right now, since Biden's been in office, he's been the COVID president. He's been the provoker to anger. He's been the agitator. So he wants to get in everybody's business, and that's kind of what Mars is like. It's a war planet, and so it could be a bringer of war too. So anyway, now we're waiting for August 30 when the next supermoon takes place. So the three planets, if you put in a date in Skyview, August 30th. Venus, Mercury, and Mars are more spread apart. Venus will actually do a retrograde. What that means is that it kind of does a little celestial dance. It'll be forward and then it'll be backward. Saturn does that a lot because it's a very slow-moving planet, so it appears like it's going ahead or behind. Imagine like you're on a highway and you're going 55 and then you slow down to 50 and the car next to you looks like it's going faster. It's kind of like that. So you can go back and forth, back and forth. You're going generally the same speed, but it looks like one is going faster than the other. So then you have then you have Venus. So Venus is at retrograde towards Sarton. Again, that's the crab or Cancer. The sun is going to be at the feet of Ariel. That's the Lamb of God. That's Aries, or excuse me, the lion. Sorry, the lion of the tribe of Judah, Ariel, Leo. Okay, and the other two planets, Mercury and Mars, are further moving towards Bethulah, which is Virgo, and God calls Israel his virgin. So Virgo represents Israel. So whenever there's something going on in Israel, you're going to see these planets kind of coming into the fray, and the sun is getting very close to the head of Virgo. So anytime you see the sun in Virgo, that's supposed to be the sign of the new civil year, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah. So, and because we have, this complicated calendar system, the Hebrew calendar, sometimes it's a whole year off or a whole month off. And so one of these days, we're going to figure out the right calendar. There's a lot of discussion about that. So I know that I'm sure you have some viewers on there that'll say, well, do you believe in the lunar Sabbath? Things like that. So I think everybody has a truth about something, but I don't think God is going to allow us to reconcile all of that until the fullness of times has come. So by the time the blue moon occurs, we will be a few days following the BRICS summit. So we're talking about digital currency, you were mentioning, and then we'll also be days away from my prediction about World War III beginning. And so we're seeing a lot of things happening right now. Let's go ahead and go to the next PowerPoint. I think that'll help us segue. Some of you have been noticing things happening in Africa. You've got the Niger line and of course there's the thing called there's a line, a 60-mile line that borders Belarus and Poland. It's called the Suwalki Gap. And think of it like walkie-talkie. Yeah, think of it like walkie-talkie. It's spelled the same, only it's Su, that's S-U, walkie. the Suwalki Gap, there's 10,000 troops that are being sent from Poland to that Suwalki Gap there because they're getting a little nervous about tactical weapons, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got the Wagner group and their presence is all over the place in Africa right now too. And Russia is behind all of that. And I was looking at a map of Africa. If you just Google influence of Russia in Africa, they have probably about 90% of Africa under their control now with China.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, just for purposes of our discussion here, those of you who follow me on Telegram, on my channel, Stephen Vigil on Telegram, and also on Radio Free Alaska, I have linked to a program I did with Scott Bennett on Tuesday concerning these issues and a rather exhaustive study of what's taking place on the Suwalki corridor and also what's taking place in Central Africa. And it's a very interesting situation because what is going on now is that, what you're talking about, these 10,000 troops coming up in Poland, there's also been troops placed by Lithuania. There's 3,000 Germans and 1,000 American troops at this very same place. And they're facing about 9,000 Wagner troops, although there could be as many as 90,000 Wagner troops laying in wait in Belarus. In addition to the Wagner PMC, which is a mercenary organization, having a strong presence in Niger and also in Burkina Faso and also in Mali, all of whom have declared alliance with Niger and Algeria, which is the most armed nation in Africa. Now, Nigeria this afternoon entered into Niger with troops. They've agreed with the EWOCAS, that which is the European, the Eastern, the Economic Cooperation Unit of Western African States, is now going into ECOWAS. They're going over the border into Niger. They're entering with troops. So that war is now underway. It's underway. It's not going to happen. It's underway. It's happening.
Right.
And that war is going to be extremely violent. If you recall the history of what took place in Uganda and in the Congo and in that Central African area when the civil war
it hasn't begun, but it hasn't been declared yet. And that's
it hasn't been declared yet. That's correct.
So that's where my prediction comes in. So praise God. This is great how this PowerPoint lines up with what we're talking about. So let's look at this World War connection here. Turkey earthquakes. Okay, there was one on October 3rd, 1914. So we're going layer deeper here into this. So 7.0 magnitude earthquake, pretty significant. And I call anything 7 or above the finger of God, the fingerprint of God. Anything below that, it's questionable, but it's definitely a message. It's something very significant. So here you have October 3rd, 1914. Now look to the right, and you'll see October 4th, 1914 that's just one day later, Erev Sukkot. So we have a feast day. And then World War I begins on July 28th, 1914. We're not even talking about the hybrid solar eclipses right now. We're just talking about a pattern here of you have earthquake followed immediately by a feast day or a holiday that is celebrated by the Jewish people or in Israel. And then you have World War I starting on July 28th, 1914. And by the way, July 26th was when all this went down with Niger. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So just a couple of days apart there. Okay, so now, and boy, I'll tell you, if I had another hour, I can show you something else that will blow your mind about some things that are repeating in history. But let's go down one line. September 21st, 1939, there was a 6.3 magnitude earthquake in Turkey. Pretty significant. And there was, until then, or until this year, that was actually the most significant earthquake that took place. I think
right. And 6.3 in Turkey, I mean, you might say 6.3, well, that's not that significant. In Turkey, it is. It will do a great deal of damage. Many, many buildings will fall and many, many people will die from it.
Yeah. And I believe, without going into a lot of detail, because I didn't send you the PowerPoints on it, but this is kind of a repeat of the sign of Jonah. Why did the people of Nineveh hastily repent? They had an earthquake, they had a solar eclipse, and they had a famine, and they had a coup. So they maybe not a coup, but they were at war.
Right.
So they were ready to repent. So they knew when Jonah came, they go, oh, wow, we worship the god of the fish. And here's a guy called a prophet. And he's saying that we're all going to be wiped out. And he just came out of a fish. So I guess we got to stop, celebrating the fish god, that is. And we need to. So, yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of reasons why I'm seeing history repeating itself that goes all the way back to the War of 1812. And there's going to be a comet that's going to actually reflect that, not this year, but the following year, right after this the solar eclipse of 2024. All right, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So we had the earthquake, the second earthquake in Turkey, and the very next day, or excuse me, not very next day, but September 22nd. That's a misprint there. It says 1914. It should say 1939. I'll tell you what. I'm allowed one mistake a day, I guess.
No mistakes here, John. No, we just no problem. No problem.
Yeah. So get that into your brain that okay, that's supposed to be 1939. And I lost the PowerPoint because I'm
trying to see if I can change it. I can't. I'm not going to.
Yeah, because it's a hard copy.
Yeah, it's a hard image. Yeah. Okay, let me put it back up.
I will do it in my end.
Fear not, my friend. I will have it up here in just 1 second.
Yeah, and the next one over says 1914 also. It's hard to catch all that. I don't know. This took me a week to put together.
No, I totally understand it, John. Believe me, I have these kinds of things happen to me all the time. I was hoping I could change it for you, but
yeah, that's okay.
I mean, there's some things we can do here. Fear not.
Yeah. All right. So the very next day was Erev Yom Kippur, the highest holiday of the year. All right, and then on September 1st, that's I see what you're doing. So on September 1st, that should actually say 1938, September 21st, 1938, and then 22nd, 1938, and then in 1939 was World War II, so September 1st.
Okay, now while we're talking about that and doing these corrections here, is this also the case October 3rd, 1913?
That's correct. That is, it should say 1913. I don't know how that didn't get changed. So, sometimes I've had that happen where I make I put something in there and it doesn't allow me to save the change.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. Yeah. So October 3rd, 1913, followed by Erev Sukkot, 1913, the very next day. And then July 28th, 1914. So this is all in the same Hebrew calendar year. So let's keep that in mind, because the year would have started in September, late September, and then 10 days later would be, or excuse me, the mid-September, then late September would be Yom Kippur, and then Erev Sukkot would be 5 days later. Okay, so July 28th, 1914 was World War I. Okay, so then next line down, September 21st, 1938 is the earthquake in Turkey, followed by the very next day is Yom Kippur. And then on September 1st, right before the end of the year of the Hebrew calendar, was World War II, September 1st. All right, now this is where it gets exciting. And I say excited because, man, I want our God, a King of the universe, to get this settled. I mean, there's people that are trying to pray against this kind of stuff, but what is going to bring people to their knees? We saw what happened in 9/11, and the churches were flooded. And then about 3 months later, then they went back to normal. It's like, well, I didn't see what I was looking for here, but it wasn't true repentance.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
Yeah. And so now we got the possibility of World War III, and it could be so devastating. I mean, we're talking that movie, The Jesus Revolution, will be a picnic in comparison. And we're going to see a great revival. And that's why Saturn is so key, because it's sitting right there on the lap of the waterman, and it has a bucket with water. So it's pouring out. It's an outpouring. It's the outpouring of the wind of God.
Mm-hmm.
So
it signifies the outpouring of the end of an era.
There you go.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, and I think you're right about that, John. I think everybody knows it, including the World Economic Forum. They're talking about a great reset. Well, reset means somebody's going to push the end plug, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to reset your computer, that means you're turning it off for a second before it reboots, right?
Yeah.
And anything else you're intending on resetting. So here in this situation, we're talking about, they all know that there's going to be a reset, because of course you cannot take the Western world is roughly $200 quadrillion in debt. Okay, there's no curing that. There's no paying off that debt. Yeah. It is immeasurable debt, and it's not going to go away. The Western world is incurably corrupted. It's incurably corrupted. I mean, you're talking about a disease, like Isaiah says, it's disease from the head to the foot. Every aspect of the body is sick, every part of it. And this is true. So now Yah is saying, I'm going to pour out the end. The end is going to come like a bucket of water. Not that there's going to be a flood flooding the earth, but it's going to be poured out. In other words, the end is going to come as an enormous pouring out, not just as I'm going to hit the switch, but rather the end of this system is coming to an end. And I can tell you, I don't know how you feel about it, but when we talk about the end of fiat currency, I say hallelujah. When you talk about the end of endless indebtedness, I say hallelujah. When you talk about the end of Western banking, I say hallelujah. Adios.
Right? Since 2017, I believe that we were entering in a time of 7 years of prosperity, and we saw our economy just flourish and go through the roof. And then right after Biden took office, everything started coming down. Well, I knew this was going to happen. I had been telling people, since 2017, I says, it's like a roller coaster. You're going to go real high, and then you're going to go real low. But we're not at that bottom yet.
No, not even close.
We're in a free fall, though, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And so if this BRICS has any legs to it, any teeth, we could see a runaway inflation, hyperinflation. We could see an economic disaster. The
economic disaster is already underway. I mean, the news was breaking today that the year-to-year retail mortgage applications are down 31%. That's 1/3, right? And you've got hyperinflation going through the roof. So you've got a question of inflation coming up, the dollar devaluation, and BRICS is going to represent all of the nations who are tired of being abused. I mean, literally, the United States and its handling of the dollar has been like an abusive husband. We've just been, right, beating these countries with the backhand and telling them to sit down and shut up, or we're going to beat them more. And now they've all gone to the women's shelter and said, hey, we're not doing this anymore. So what's taking place now is BRICS is a reaction to that. It's like, how many sanctions can you put on us because you didn't like the deodorant we used, or you didn't like the way we smiled at the last convention? So we end up being sanctioned, more sanction. Well, we're not going to do it anymore. When they get an alternative, they get the key to the front door, they go out the front door.
Yeah.
Well, so you have some.
Yeah. So you're gonna have this. I mean, like I said, that we're like a roller coaster. We haven't reached the bottom yet, but at the I believe that at the end of the 7 years, which is kind of an arbitrary thing, it's not exactly 365 days or 290, whatever, 390. But the marker, the prophetic marker, is the solar eclipses. So April 8, 2024, exactly 14 days before Pesach, the 7 years of famine would begin. It'll be an end of an exile. There, people are starting to say, you know what? We can't live with this. We need to go to Israel. We need to repopulate the land, and we need to take our inheritance. That's where our inheritance is. And a lot of people are thinking, well, I just want to get raptured out of here. Well, what do you want, a hypodermic needle or something? I mean, that's kind of what it's like. You know, a lady, says, I want an epidural. You know, I can't handle the pain. You know, instead of going through the whole childbirth. And we're having these birth pangs right now, and people say, I just want to get out of here. They don't want to go through it. And I say, well,
that's a lot of it. People wanting to get out of here. But, also, John, you got to keep in mind, too, that, the times that are before us are such a time as this.
Mhm.
And the remnant has been called, and it's been called to specific things. And some people are going to leave and go into the wilderness. Some people are not. Some people are going to remain, and some people are going to serve. They're going to serve the community. They're going to do what Yah calls them to do, whatever that may be.
And it's going to be the greatest outreach of all time.
And if we die, well, whatever. It's not the end of things.
We're all going to die eventually.
Yeah. So it's far better for us to be serving Yah at that time than to not be serving Yah. So let's just do what 2 Thessalonians 2 talks about. Just don't be troubled in word or in letter that I've told you that the end is here. Just keep on with your business. Keep on doing what you're supposed to do, even acknowledging what's coming out. Now, talk to me about this third tier here that you've got going here.
All right.
February 6, 2023.
Yeah. So there was a 7.8 magnitude, and there was some areas in Turkey that were so bad that literally the earth sunk and left canyons and just completely wiped out olive groves, and over 50,000 people died. So that was on Tu B'Shavat. So it was right on the day that Israel celebrates the New Year for trees. They have 4 New Years. You've got the New Year of Years, which is Yom Teruah, the blowing of the shofar. Other people call it Rosh Hashanah, the birthday of the earth. And then you have Pesach, and you have Shavuot, which is some people call it they call it Pentecost. So it's the day of the celebrating God giving us the Torah, and but also when the Holy Spirit came down, the Holy Wind of God. So you have the 3 pilgrimage feast days, but then you also have Tu B'Shavat, which is the New Year of Trees, and then you have a New Year for animals. So I believe that's correct. And then we have that happening. And then now the only thing that hasn't happened with these 3 earthquakes in Turkey, followed by a feast day or a holiday, is a world war. And so if we go to the next plate, I'll explain why do I feel that we could be seeing a war start. And I'm talking declared war. So take a look at this. So in September 15th, 1913, there was a blood moon. And then a solar eclipse on February 25th, 2014. And then World War I began, and I see you changed the date there. Is that bleeding from another page? Is that what that is?
I don't know. I didn't change. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Hold on.
Bleeding from the other page, I guess.
Yeah.
So 1914, World War I begins. So you see the graph before there. It was a Shemitah year, and the solar eclipse happened in the constellation of Aquarius, the day of the outpouring. Okay, so that's Delhi, D-E-L-I, the waterman. And so then you have a Shemitah. Hitler's birthday is on April 20th, 1889. Now, watch this. This is going to blow your mind. So then we have the Jubilee beginning. So 49 years plus 1 year, which equals 50. And then you have a Shemitah right at the next blood moon. which is on 11/7. Remember, I told you to remember that date, 11/7/1938, followed by a solar eclipse, April 19th. Okay, when is Hitler's birthday? It's the 20th. And this is all going to start making sense here in a minute. So then you have a solar eclipse on 4/19/1939. World War II begins September 1st, 1939. And then you have a Jubilee, Yom Kippur War. That's on October 6th, 1973. So and then if you look down at the bottom there, you see the blue bars. Bracketing 7 years times 12 years equals 84 years. So you have Shemitah and you have order, governmental order, also representing the 12 tribes of Israel too. So then you have this third section over here. Look at the date, blood moon, November 8th. That was when we had the midterm elections last year. It was a blood moon. Okay, and there was a lot of stuff there. That's another teaching right there that I've done that is just so amazing. I don't have time to go through all that, unfortunately, but the blood moon, look at the previous one. The blood moon in 1938, just a day apart. And then the solar eclipse, just a day apart from Hitler's birthday, and we had a solar eclipse on that day. And then World War II began on September 1st. So do you see my theory here? And I'm going to call it a theory because I'm not going to try to say, I prophesy, thus saith the Lord. I'm just telling you that everything lines up, that it could actually start on September 2nd, based on that middle section there. So you have 11/7, 4/19, 9/1. And then third section, 11/8, 4/20, 9/2. All right, now so let's go.
There's interesting coincidences with the date that Russia entered into Ukraine too.
Yeah, that happened also, I believe, I have to go back into my journal, but it was right around the time of Purim.
Yeah, it was February 24th, February 21st.
And you had the Olympics going on at that time, and it was in China. And a lot of people were thinking that China was going to be following Russia, and they've been just kind of taking their time. So, kind of simmering the pot, if you will.
Yeah, right. Well, let's take a look at this slide, John, and then let's go through this, and then let's take some questions, okay?
Okay. All right. So here you have January 30th, 1933 was when Hitler rose to power. And there's a lunar eclipse on 11/7. We already talked about that. And when that lunar eclipse took place, it did a flyby. It actually went in front of Uranus. And Uranus goes around the entire Mazarot every 84 years. And then it was a hybrid eclipse on 4/19. It's just the day before Hitler's birthday. And then in 1939, there was another lunar eclipse, or a blood moon. And that was on the 3rd of May. Remember what happened on the 5th or 6th of May this year? That was the coronation of King Charles. Okay. Then World War II began September 1st, 1939. All right, moving forward. So now you see the bracket of 84 years. So there you have another blood moon. We're going to move this thing out of the way. Okay, yeah, so on 11/8, that's this year, there's a blood moon and a transit, a Uranus transit. So in other words, it went right in front of Uranus. It just blacked it out. You couldn't see it. Or, to be honest with you, I mean, if you don't have a telescope, you can't see Uranus anyway. And I doubt that even back in the scripture days that they didn't even know that there was a Uranus. But nevertheless, God knows, and God has assigned them for these last days. So that's why they weren't there in those days, because God, he reserved them for such a time as this. All right, so then you have the hybrid solar eclipse again. 2 hybrid solar eclipses. And just remember, A hybrid solar eclipse is a combination of a annular and a total solar eclipse. It happens very quick, and by the way, that I didn't put it on here. Both of those hybrid eclipses happened in Australia.
Another very good point.
And I found it was interesting that I was in Australia during this time, or I was getting ready to go to Australia. I was there end of May and early June. Okay, and then you have the lunar eclipse on the 5th and the 6th. So as the lunar eclipse ended, they couldn't see it in Great Britain because it was too bright. The sun had already risen up, so it was over. But the lunar eclipse, coupled by King Charles' rise to power. So you have Hitler's rise to power, now you have King Charles' rise to power. And he's been kind of quiet for a while. And so I keep forgetting to go and look into that. But one of the things I think he's quietly working with right now is compliance to climate control and all this other stuff.
Well, yeah, it's all being implemented.
And just today, President Luna, I think is his name, of Brazil.
Yeah,
he just made,
Silva.
Yeah, and he's a left wing, but he is. I mean, that's the same country that gave the image of Prince Charles and calling him the savior of the world. This was back when he was Prince Charles, when he was pretty young. So they think that this could be actually the image that would be put in as an abomination that causes desolation. It would be the image of the beast. It looks just like Prince Charles or King Charles. But anyway, it's just interesting, all these things lining up like that. And they're going to actually force people to comply to this new thing. And I think, King Charles is probably behind a lot of that. So
yeah,
then,
he is. Sure he is.
Yeah. So everybody, every country answers to him. And it's all behind the scenes. But if you look hard enough, you'll see how much influence he really has over the nations. All right. And then finally, you have World War III beginning on September 2nd. Now, let's just ask this question. What if it doesn't happen? God is still God, right? I mean, and I'm not a prophet, and I'm not prophesying. I'm just telling you, these are some interesting patterns. And there's all kinds of things that are happening right now that point to World War III beginning probably sometime in September. And if it happens on September 2nd, well, by golly, there's going to be something pretty significant around that time.
Well, John, I mean, you're talking about this, and, there is, what do you mean by World War III begins? There are many people who believe we're already in World War III.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a declaration or the first use of a nuclear weapon.
Sure.
And all of those things are very possible. I mean, to give you an idea of how close we are on the brink of nuclear war, in Belarus, they've introduced many nuclear weapons. They're short-range nuclear weapons on Iskander missiles. Yesterday, the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, which used to be called Königsberg, and it sits on a sea facing Gdansk, Poland, they just went through a whole exercise of launching Iskander-2 nuclear missiles. In other words, they did everything but the launch. They targeted their sites. They went through the whole drill. They pressed the go button, everything. The only thing that was disabled was the missiles. The missiles didn't fly. Everything else was in place, all the targeting and all the rest of it. And so the Russians have prepared in anticipation of, and it seems like, when I did the presentation on Gog and Magog, it was surprising who we were talking about. And interestingly enough, it is the West that has had the hook in its jaw and has been drug into this war. It's the West that's been drug in. It's like, no, we can't get out. Why not? Because there's a hook in our jaw and it's just dragging us right in and we can't get out. And it's like, it seems to me that we should be getting out. And it seems to anybody else who's rational that, look, Ukraine is not an ally of the United States. It's not the 51st state. It's not a member of the EU. It's not a member of NATO. It's an Orthodox country that goes under the Orthodox orbit. What are we doing?
Well, look at history. And if history repeats itself, we know that World War I started with an assassination of Ferdinand.
Right.
World War II began with the invasion of Poland. So Poland's in the news again, but it could be a reverse. Instead of Germany, could it be Russia or Belarus? And then you have, was just yesterday, there was an assassination in Ecuador.
That's right.
Not that that has anything to do with it, but an assassination could happen somewhere. You know, that World War I did not start in
Austria or in Hungary or in Germany or in France or in Russia. It started in Bosnia Herzegovina.
Mm-hmm. And then you have another thing too is North Korea. Some are saying that North Korea is going to be the one that will start everything.
Well, North Korea today, while you mentioned that,
mm-hmm.
Kim Jong-un basically told everybody, prepare for war.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was his statement this morning, prepare for war.
Yep.
And
he fired his top general. And so I've been theorizing this for a while. You know, he's the, you know, Donald Trump calls him the rocket man. And, you know, if he keeps pulling that trigger too many times, he's going to get a little trigger happy and he's going to miscalculate and it's going to fall somewhere on innocent people in another country and they're going to get upset and they're going to say, oh, you want war? Okay, we'll give it to you.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think I think it will be an intentional launch. Now, there's a couple of things there that we got to talk about with North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, they have a very formidable fighting army.
Yes, they do.
Okay. I mean, the North Korean soldier is a vicious fighting machine.
Yeah.
And that's just one thing to keep in mind. And they can, you know, they're 10th degree black belts in Korean fighting style, and they can live on a bowl of rice a day. And they're absolutely 150% loyal to Kim. So this is the kind of situation that you've got going. Now, they have a hatred for what Japan did to Korea when it was Manchuria, the kind of slaughter that took place in Manchuria at the hands of the Japanese Empire. Premise number one. Premise number two, the United States in the Korean War, you know, we took out 5 million civilians during the Korean War. That we're not talking about the casualties of men in uniform. We're talking about the number of civilians that died during the Korean conflict, which we didn't want to call a war. And Douglas MacArthur wanted to use nuclear weapons there, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have vendetta that's sitting there in North Korea. And so they're willing to get it on. Now, think about this for a theory for just a second. If North Korea were to do something like, okay, here's what we're going to do. They launch nuclear weapons, one at Tokyo and maybe one at Guam, that they've already proven they can hit. So they launch nuclear weapons at those two targets and potentially launch an EMP over the continental United States. And while these missiles are in motion, they put 150,000 or 250,000 troops over the Korean border immediately into Seoul. So we've got about 35,000 troops there, and the South Koreans have their military prepared to fight. So maybe they got about 100,000 men in the field. But now you've got 250,000 men coming over the top, and you've got house-to-house combat going on in Seoul. So are we going to launch a nuclear weapon at Seoul to take out the Korean army, North Korean army? No, we're not going to do that. We might want to take out Pyongyang, but we're not going to be taking out Seoul. So if the more troops he gets over the border and into South Korea, the better chance he has of sustaining his land-based military. And he's going to win the land-based fight unless we do something else, right?
A lot of people think that, you know, just because Korea is a, you know, like a Christian nation and, you know, they are supported by the U.S., that they could win this war. But no, I've known for many, many years, at least 30 years, that if North Korea ever went to war with South Korea would not win.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the same. I mean, you know, it depends on the impetus of the people, right? And the North Koreans have a vendetta. So when you look at that aspect, and then you see, of course, China is just sitting back going, well, let's wait until the U.S. has committed all of its resources, right? You know what Napoleon said, right? Don't interrupt your enemy when he's making mistakes.
Right.
And this is the case in the U.S. I mean, we have literally depleted our arsenal in Ukraine, as has Germany, as has France, as has Britain, right? We don't have anything left.
And we've been caught flat-footed. They had no idea that this was going to happen in Niger.
Right.
What's going on now. Now they don't know what to do. They're like stuck between two opinions. Should we go or should we stay? So and now it's becoming a vacuum power grab for Russia. They're just going to take that, and then now they got control of the uranium supplies and whatever else they want to have power over.
Right.
And at the same time, Niger is saying, we want the imperialists out.
Right.
You white people, get out of here. We're tired of you stealing our natural gas. We don't want this pipeline.
And our uranium and our gold. And we've been a colony of France for over a century. France has improved and looks great. And we're sitting here in the same exact condition we've been for our last 100 years. It's been nothing but resource rape. And once again, it's treating Niger like it's a prostitute, right?
Yeah.
And this is the great difficulty. And so, of course, those countries are very, very angry right now. And of course, you heard what the head of the junta in Niger said about the American threat to withhold money, right?
Oh, yeah.
He says, well, if don't give the money to us, keep it to put Victoria Nuland on a weight loss program.
Yeah. Well, I think what's going to come down to is this coup is going to outlast all of this West African alliance, and they're just going to let them be because they see that the cost is too great, and it's like, well, okay, there's another one gone, another one bites the dust. So
yeah, I agree with that.
As they are, because they don't, God forbid, they don't want this president to be killed. So they're just wait it out. They'll try these sanctions. It's funny that they don't want to sanction. I think this was you that said that they don't want to sanction uranium, but they want to sanction everything else. Yeah.
Well, it's incredible what's going on. I mean, quite frankly, the American leadership is the most incompetent leadership that I've ever seen in the history of my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. And this is all by God's design. God is allowing all of this to for our nation to become weak and unstable. We've got so much division in our country. They can't decide. I mean, we all thought that if we had control of the House, we can get impeachment going through. We can.
Oh yeah, right.
Election overturned. Yeah, no, this didn't happen. And I'm hearing these so-called prophets telling this stuff. These these conspiracy theorists, and they're saying that JFK Jr. is alive, Princess Diana is alive, and it's about ready to go down. And I'm like, well, that happened already, and it still hasn't gone down yet. So how many more months are we going to be led on a string with this?
Well, as you know, according to some of those propagandists, Hillary Clinton has been executed 9 times in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it's absurd. But let me take just a moment here, John.
Yeah.
To get people to, if you have questions, put your questions in the chat now and put them in all caps so that we can see the questions. Okay. So any question that you want to ask me or John, just put the question in all caps in the chat, and I will try to feed them as we go along. Okay. And Jesse, if you're still here, maybe you can copy and post them too, or point them out. All right. So let's take some questions on this, John. Now, there's some very interesting things happening. Some of the people are commenting about KC3, right? King Charles III.
Yeah, KC3. Mm-hmm.
There's been some very interesting people that have come back and said, look, we think he's the Antichrist or or whatever, the one, right? Yeah. And of course, there's plenty of reason to support this. And I forget what his name is, Cohen. Yes. He has gone out of his way to point to all the markers that appeared to point to KC3.
And I am a friend of his. I actually am a friend of his. I got his personal contact number, and we've had long talks about this. He's coming out with another book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, okay. So here's a question for you, John.
Mm-hmm.
So Speaking the Truth wants to know what you think about 2 Baruch 85:10. Thank you both for sharing, and come back, John, and share more. Well, I mean, I wish I had 85:10 up in front of me right now.
Me too. Should have got myself.
I don't have it right now, so we're going to move on to another question. So okay. Angela Ravel writes, are we talking about Chazon 6, in Revelation chapter 6, 3 and 4, the red horse on September 2nd, 2023? Well, yeah, the red horse, of course, the red horse riding is not necessarily marked by a specific date. I mean, the red horse is riding right now, in my opinion. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Okay, so here's another comment. Samson says, Great Schism of 1074, when the Eastern Church headquartered in Istanbul broke away from the Western one. Okay, in Rome. Yeah, right. Okay, 555 says, I have received a message from the Holy Spirit as follows. Yuval Noah Harari, Antichrist. He does not desire women nor worship the God of his forefathers. Well, you know who Harari is, right, John?
That sounds familiar. Now,
He
is this
is
still
the
the same?
advisor to Herr Klaus Schwab.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, is this the same question? Is this related to the beginning of the question where it talks about not KC3, but
Yeah, KC3. Yeah, talking about the Antichrist. I mean, is it KC3? Is it Barack Obama? Is it Yuval Noah Harari? You know, who's the Antichrist, right?
Got it. Well, Obama is an Antichrist, but he's not the Antichrist. He stood before. This is another thing I haven't talked about, but I believe we're in what I call a reverse tsunami. In 2003 was the anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase, and I was living in Louisiana at the time, and the Holy Spirit told me there's going to be a great revival, and there's going to be a tsunami in Louisiana. And this was following a tsunami in Indonesia. I was in Indonesia, and God said there's going to be a tsunami in Indonesia. So that was 2001 when I got that vision. And then we know that what happened in 2006 was the America's tsunami. Prior to that, on Christmas Eve, 2005, was the Indonesian tsunami. So when Lake Pontchartrain overflowed its banks, it caused the greatest forced migration in world history.
Oh,
so,
interesting.
Yeah. So all these people were scattered like a ripple, like a concentric circles. There, and I got a newspaper clipping and it says where they went. It has zip codes and little dots for all the zip codes. And most of them just kind of went like a fan. They just fanned out into all of the states of the United States. But the following year, 1804, was the Lewis and Clark expedition. And so Colorado is right in that line there of the Lewis and Clark expedition, where the Louisiana Purchase is. It goes all the way up to Montana. So then after, 2 years to the date, Obama was standing in a replica of the Pergamon throne.
Right.
The same kind of
Pergamon
one.
altar, the throne of Satan.
At the time it was called Invesco Field. And he was standing there saying, yes, we can. And you can there's a backward masking that reverses his words and it says, thank you, Satan. He said it 4 times. And so it was on that day, August 26, 2006, 2 years, 2008, 2 years to the date that Katrina made landfall. So then what I believe was happening was that there was a sealing of a curse where this voodoo curse that came in from Louisiana and all these people that came up, they had to remigrate. It changed the whole landscape of Colorado. And it went from a red state, Colorado means color red. It was a red state, became a purple state, and now it's a blue state. And we've got a homosexual governor. We've got nothing but Democrat-controlled Senate and House in Denver. We have absolutely total lawlessness and up and down. But then all of a sudden, things were starting to change. We had the Asbury Revival. There's been 9 of them in the last 100 years. And this one that happened prior to the Jesus Revolution. There was some key events in the heavens that happened when both of these things happened on feast days or holidays and also events in the heavens. But I was examining this and I'm thinking, I think what's happening here is we're going to see a reverse tsunami. So, when you have a tsunami, it takes everything in its path. If you watch that Japanese tsunami that happened in 2013,
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Amazing.
But then it settles, and then it slowly goes back and takes everything right back like a whiplash. So I believe what's happening right now is we're seeing a lot of backlash. Target is they tried the LGBTQ thing in the month of June, and now they're being sued by one of the great investors. And you have Bud Light. You have all this wokeness going on, and it's now backfiring. And conservatives are standing up and saying enough is enough. And when you were doing the thing about the 10 nations, that Britain has fallen, the Union Jack fell to the ground, and then you had the LGBTQ flag in between the two flags, and showing that we're now one nation under, because we now have a whole new recognition that something else is sovereign, and it's definitely not the United States anymore. So, but we're seeing the backlash. There's going to have to be something that's going to break. And for this nation to fall to their knees, for this world to fall to their knees, it's going to take a world event. You thought that COVID-19 was something, but a world war, that will bring everybody to the knees. And we're going to see a revival like we've never seen before, but it's going to be like a reverse tsunami. So if we do not get caught in that wave, we're going to miss it. And so we need to be in prayer right now, but we can't be praying against. Do
not stand in the way of Yah's judgment.
Yeah, that's right.
It's cat, it's coming through, and don't get in its way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or else you're just going to miss the whole opportunity, what God is trying to do. And if you listen to his voice, keep his feast days. That's the number one thing. Keep his feast days, keep his Shabbat. Yeah. And so what that's going to do is your mind, your spiritual mind is going to be open for the voice of God. It makes you sovereign. And so when you're sovereign and you're paying attention, he says, look to the heavens for your redemption draws nigh. So if you're going to see that redemption, because you are paying attention. That rhymes, doesn't it?
Now, John, let me ask you, you're in Colorado, right? You're in Denver?
Yes.
Okay, but you're going to be presenting something in Kerrville in Texas?
As a matter of fact, yes, one of the people that might be watching tonight has invited me to do a concert on the day of the eclipse. It's the annular eclipse, and it's going to hit Kerrville again on April 8th, 2024. So they're going to get the Tav, the X marks the spot.
Right, the Tav, right? The Tav is going to be struck over the United States. And then ultimately by August, the Aleph will also appear.
Yeah, the what?
The Aleph.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So you have the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, the strength of the cross, the strength of the covenant. So
and that is very significant, John. I want to speak to that for just a second.
Yeah, please do.
Because all of this judgment will come to a complete end in August of 2024. What Yah intends to accomplish will be accomplished in August of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And what remains to be seen. But between now and then, don't get in the way of his judgment.
So did we see that PowerPoint that it says I think I passed it. It says okay, we had there it is, the millennial tetrads. We didn't look at that one. You want to look at that one real quick? Or you got some questions you want to take?
Hold on just 1 second.
I hope I sent that to you. It says millennial tetrads. This one's a little busy, but I'm sure people want to get a screenshot of that.
Okay, hold on just 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, just 1 second.
This is my final.
You see, okay, here. Hold on. I just have to get to the right screen here. And for me, it's a little bit tricky. Okay, here we go. So you're talking about this one.
Yes, there you go. Okay, so we're going to have another set of tetrads. We had them in 2014, 2015. Okay, so you see there, and they were on feast days, Passover, Tabernacles, Passover, Tabernacles. I got to see all but one of them because the other one was in Israel. I think it was the third one. All right, and then you have the hybrid eclipse. I got to get different glasses on here. Okay, so you have the and then there's a don't worry about the 9 years, 5 days for right now. I'm just showing like there's a mirror of these events. It's mirroring each other. So then you have 420, and there's another set of tetrads. So you have 425, 32. Okay, so remember, I talked about the 7 years of famine, right? The end of our exile is 2024, and then we continue on to 2032 and 2033. So you have the tetrads, and then you have another eclipse. You have the annular one that's coming up this year in just a couple of months, and that's 7 days after Tabernacles. And then you have a total eclipse that's 14 days before Passover. All right, and then you're going to have April 14th, 2033, and October 8th, 2033. So then you have Tabernacles again. So there you go at the very bottom, you see annular eclipse. That's October 2nd, 2024. And we haven't even talked about comets tonight. That's another day, another time. But we're going to have a comet right after that eclipse in 2024.
All right. Well, interesting stuff.
During the day.
Interesting stuff, John. Okay, so we've gotten through those screens, and I want to come back again. Now, there's been a couple of other questions here, and I just want to answer them real quick. One question is, does the Sefer contain the entire Apocrypha? And that's CC asking that question, and the answer is yes. The Sefer contains all of the Apocrypha that was found in the Septuagint and was canonized by the Roman Church at the Council of Trent in 1536. So yeah, it's all there. Every bit of it's there. Okay, and let's see what else we have here. Okay, let me see. Yeah, so what has Yah showed you about Donald Trump, John?
Well, I actually did a video that showed how Donald Trump is the blood moon president. He was born on a blood moon. He was inaugurated, well, not inaugurated, well, when he was inaugurated, his 1 year later, on the first of the triads, on January 31st, 2018, he gave his first State of the Union address. And then the second time that it fell on the beginning of his 3rd year anniversary, another blood moon. It was the 3rd blood moon. And he was starting his 3rd year. And so that was on January 21st, 2019. And so then right after that, all the impeachment was going on, and, he's trying to run again. And of course, I believe that God had called him specifically to restore Israel's prominence. He was instrumental in the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, and he even the dates that he set had a 7 connection. His how old he was when he became president. He was 70 years old in the 7th month on the 7th day. But in my video, it's called the first 7 years, I think it was called, and it was part 1, and then I also had a part 2. I never did part 3. It turned out to be 2.5 hours long, and it caused my computer to crash. And things have been happening so fast, like a roller coaster, that I can't keep up anymore. So I've just been journaling. But he definitely was called of God as a blood moon president, and that he was to restore Israel's prominence that no other president in history was able to do. And there was a 7 connection in his age and the timing of his inauguration. And he was also strongly connected to Netanyahu, which also had a 7 connection. So hopefully that answers the question there.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
that's
he's
great.
going to come again, though. Is he going to become a president again? There was a Jupiter rising on the horizon when he announced his bid to the 2024 election. So there's a very good possibility. We see all this stuff looming, and whether it's real or fake, is he going to be indicted? Is he going to be put in jail? I don't know. I'll tell you what, America's in trouble. And I wouldn't
Yeah,
want
America's in trouble. And, the idea of putting Donald Trump in jail is, again, this is one of the things that it's going to be about as smart as starting a war in Ukraine. Everything that this group does just backfires in their face. And it's just amazing. I mean, it's the leadership of what I call winking, blinking, and nod.
Yeah.
And, winking is Kamala, and Blinken is the Secretary of State, and nod is Joe Biden. He's nodding off, right?
Oh, you're nodding. Oh man, that is hilarious. No wonder you're called doctor.
Blinken, Blinken, and nod. Yeah. Well, John, I'll tell you. So we're going to wrap it up, and I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you, John, for being ready to move on the dime. We didn't have much warning on this thing, and we were discussing this last night. And the next thing you know, here we are with a PowerPoint presentation. And moving ahead. And so I want to thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you for being here, taking the questions from our group. And you guys, thank you for welcoming John Reed Austin to our program. Remember that his teaching on the Masorot, if you want to get into the fundamentals, he has put together a substantial teaching. You can access it on Sefer Academy. It's called the Masorot, John Reed Austin, and it's sephiracademy.net, and you can do that. Don't forget to visit us at sephir.net. And we are soon, I guess I had to repent for being a false prophet when I said that we would have our large print edition back in stock in a week. It's going to be a little bit longer than that. Sorry about that, Debari, but we are going to get it. And we are going to be, we're going to be doing some things. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. All that will happen, Sherry. I think we'll have John Reed Austin back again for another presentation, and maybe we can talk about the comets on the next time around, John.
Yeah.
Also, we can also talk about some of your music too. That's a very big deal, and you're a great musician, and it's good to hear you. And by the way, what is your website? Where can people access and get to you?
Okay, so if you want a hard copy of a CD or CDs, you can go to wine, oil, bread, 4, heart.org. I'll say it again, wine, oil, bread, 4, heart.org. You can also email me for questions if you didn't get your questions answered tonight at johnreedaustinsax@gmail.com. And also, if you want to watch my videos, I have music videos, and my wife, I think right now, is working on a new one that I did in Australia, right in front of the Opera House. It's Because He Lives. And so you can go to official, you got to spell out the word official, John Reed Austin YouTube, and you'll get to see all of them there. Make sure you like and subscribe, and you'll get all the updates of new videos. But if you want a hard copy, you got to go to that website, Wine, Oil, Bread for Heart, and request that, and you can do a donate button. It'll help our mission to save the children in Mexico and Guatemala. Right now, we've been really busy going across the border and sending food, clothes, and toys to the children who are homeless there. They're in high risk of being sacrificed and abducted and sex trafficked. And so we are really hitting it hard over there. And so that's what our mission is over there.
That's great to hear, John. That's great. Well, listen, give my blessings to your wife.
Thank you.
I want to thank you again for doing this production. I want to thank all of our subscribers for being present and helping us in the chat. And looking forward to seeing you guys again next Thursday. Hopefully we'll be presenting on the dig next Thursday, which of course I didn't want to do it this Thursday because I was a little bit afraid of the controversy. And especially since John contacted me and said, we're just 2 weeks away from the war. So what are you talking about? so anyway, so thank you guys. Thank everybody for being here. John Reed Austin, thank you so much, brother. And we will see you again at another time.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Okay. Shalom, brother. Take care.
All right.